I was mean at that time. Every time I'd get in the ring, I had to have this rage and this hate for this man, and I'd beat those guys.
His sparring sessions aren't just a training routine. They are instead intense efforts by sparring partners to simply survive.
He would really brutalize the guy before he got him out of there.
If you could survive 1 or 2 rounds with me, which would be a lot of pain and probably a lot of heartbreak in your life.
That George Foreman intimidated the hell out of a lot of opponents.
George Foreman brought to the ring a sense of menace that had not been seen in the ring since Sonny Liston back in the early 1960s.
To begin the story with Foreman en route to his January 22nd, 1973 showdown with Joe Frazier. The words from Foreman at the contract signing are chilling.
I don't think you'll be interested in come out and see 2 friends shake hands. Joe Frazier and me will declare war on that day.
Nevertheless, going into the bout, it is Frazier that is the favourite.
Conventional wisdom heading into the Frazier fight was that George was a raw sort of rookie.
I thought he had a chance, but now you're talking about Joe Frazier now.
This was a Joe Frazier who had prevailed against Muhammad Ali in a 15-round war that would be known as the fight of the century. Frazier, in contrast to Foreman, seems in a more relaxed mood. When Frazier is invited to trash talk Foreman, he declines, saying trash talk isn't really his thing.
You all know that I'm not really a great rapper, mouth run offer, it is like some people we know.
When the fight begins midway through the first round, Foreman decks Frazier with an uppercut to trigger one of the most memorable lines in sports history.
Down goes Frazier! Down goes Frazier! Foreman is as poised as can be!
Foreman drops him for the second time in the round and growls at him to get back up to continue receiving a beating. Although Frazier is badly stunned from the moment of the first knockdown, he goes on to get knocked down a total of 6 times before the referee Arthur McCante Sr. calls a halt to the contest. Likely the shock of what was unfolding caused the fight to last as long as it did. Meanwhile, back in the United States, following on from his loss to Joe Frazier, Muhammad Ali has been trying to reclaim his ring sharpness and restore his reputation. He will fight 6 times in 1972, finishing the year with a stoppage win over Floyd Patterson and a knockout win over Bob Foster. Going into 1973, Ali will be accused of taking his first opponent of the year, Ken Norton, lightly.
Ali, who it seems to me has taken Kenny Norton more lightly in the pre-fight build-up here than any opponent I have known him to fight.
In the first round of their bout, Ali will have success with his jab, which he will use to dominate the round. In the second round, Ali will produce moments of higher quality offense, but he will get outworked by Norton. Beginning the third round, Ali will get up on the balls of his feet and start to bounce around the ring. Ali will take the round, but he will fail to live up to his prophecy of ending the fight in the round. As early as the 4th round, Ali's work rate drops off dramatically.
The crowd now senses that Ali is doing nothing, while Norton presumably may be punching himself out, so the crowd is beginning to boo.
He loses the round and it's 2-2 going into the 5th round. Through the middle rounds, Ali will show moments of quality, but Norton's work rate is higher. Norton will break Ali's jaw at some point. The exact moment is subject to some controversy. Norton finishes strong and takes the fight on point. Foreman will make his first defense of his heavyweight crown against Jose Roman.
Did you see that movement by Roman? Foreman later admitted to having been enraged by the gesture.
He will drop the overmatched challenger almost immediately, clubbing him on the ground for good measure. A second knockdown will soon follow. After a third, Roman will be out for the count. Joe Frazier will attempt to rebound from his shocking loss to Foreman. Taking on a difficult assignment, he will travel to London, England to face hometown fighter Joe Bugner. Bugner will attempt to do exactly what Foreman did in the first round. He lands many combinations. Frazier, however, appears completely unperturbed. Through the early rounds, he bobs and weaves to get inside, but appears happy to take one to land one. Through the late middle rounds, Bugner gets tired and Frazier begins to dominate. The fight ends in a Frazier unanimous decision. Ali will rematch Ken Norton on September the 10th, 1973. Ali comes into the fight with his jaw healed 10 pounds lighter than in the first meeting. Ali chooses to bounce and stay mobile for the early rounds, crisscrossing his feet to create an angle for his jab.
The speed has returned so far, a foot and hand.
Whilst Ali probably edges the early rounds, neither fighter comes particularly close to landing a damaging blow. In the 5th round, Ali abandons his dancing style Though his work rate doesn't drop off as dramatically as it did during the 4th round of their first fight, he begins to get outworked by Norton, who uses his energy more conservatively in the early rounds. With the flow of the fight seemingly edging in Norton's direction, in the 9th round Ali lands a right hand that hurts Norton.
Left Ali, another Ali. Right hand by Ali. It's staggered Ken Norton. Norton.
The remaining rounds are back and forth, but Ali lands some hard blows in the 12th to seal the deal and earn a decision. Ali and Frazier will rematch in early 1974. Much like his rematch against Norton, Ali will come into the ring in significantly better condition than in the first fight. Ali will fight in a more aggressive style this time. In the 2nd round, he lands a right hand that staggers Frazier. Throughout the fight, Ali will use more of the angular punches typical of Foreman's style than his usual straight punches, which Frazier was adept at slipping in the first fight. Frazier does have his moments, but a lot of his offense is shut down by Ali's wrestling on the inside. Ali takes the decision. Although he lost the 2nd fight to Ali officially, a notable number of ringside observers thought Norton won. In early 1974, Ken Norton's management will secure him a title shot against the reigning heavyweight champion of the world, George Foreman. Going into the bout, Ali is full of praise for Norton.
The man won 24 rounds with me, broke my jaw in the 1st round. I was in shape the 2nd fight. Still, I barely won the fight. I predict that we will see an upset by Ken Norton winning by a late knockout, or probably for sure a decision.
In the 1st round, Foreman shows his skill, weaving under the kind of lunging lefts that caught Ali by surprise. As Foreman starts to dictate the pace with his piston-like left jab, Norton starts to become defensive. Despite putting in a polished 1st round, between rounds Ali is dismissive of Foreman's skills.
Ain't no George Foreman, who's still a good amateur, gonna destroy Ken Norton because I couldn't do it.
To begin the 2nd round, Foreman cuts off the ring and pressures Norton. A cornered Norton tries to escape from the ropes, and as he does so, Foreman intercepts him with the right hand that staggers Norton. Foreman goes in for the finish with his usual bolo punches. Interviewed after the fight, Ali looks rattled.
How could that man go 24 rounds with you and only 2 with the heavyweight champion of the world?
Because George Foreman is not as good of a fighter scientific as I am.
In early 1974, a couple of years removed from coming out of jail, a young ambitious promoter by the name of Don King, playing both sides and the government of Zaire, will secure a deal for Muhammad Ali and George Foreman to square off in late 1974 in Kinshasa, Zaire. Going into the bout, Ali is a huge underdog amongst casual boxing fans and some experienced commentators and journalists.
I felt bad for Ali. I honestly, great as he was, I said, this guy's going to get hurt.
Ali was not picked to win. He was actually picked to get killed in that fight.
The time may have come to say goodbye to Muhammad Ali, because very honestly, I don't think he can beat George Foreman.
People were really, really afraid of what was going to happen in that fight. There were people literally fearing for Ali's life.
Foreman has not caused any longer lasting periods of unconsciousness in his opponents so far in his career. Nevertheless, concerns over Ali's health going into the fight should not be dismissed as sensationalist hype. There had been several deaths in the ring from events around the world in the 60s and 70s. The spectre of Ali going into a country where they were not used to holding boxing matches, taking on an opponent with unprecedented punching power, was likely something that terrified Ali's handlers. Despite his status as an underdog, Ali is defiant.
The whole world will have to bear witness that Muhammad Ali is the greatest of all time.
He could tag me with one good shot, that's possible. But the odds are any wise man wouldn't bet on it.
Ali will begin his training for the fight in a secluded setup in Deer Lake, Pennsylvania. Ali will set out to train hard, but his initial efforts don't look hugely optimistic. One of his sparring partners, future heavyweight champion Larry Holmes, who at the time is a novice pro with a decent but not spectacular amateur record, is doing well enough to make Ali's handlers sweat. Foreman, by contrast, is in no particular hurry to seek out high-level sparring partners. Foreman had in the past sparred with high-level guys such as Sonny Liston.
That's right, Sonny Liston and I were good friends. And boy, did he have a magnificent left jab. I used to feel it in the gym daily.
In later years, Foreman will admit that he let overconfidence sneak into his psyche and preparation.
I think that Muhammad, like Joe Frazier and all these guys at this stage, can only do what I let them do. And I'm not intending to let them do much.
So you were very confident?
Overconfident, as a matter of fact. I devastated Joe Frazier. I figured, hey, I'm just going to waste Muhammad Ali in 2 or 3 rounds.
in addition to developing an attitude as heavyweight champion of the world.
Do you know who I am and what I can do to you? That kind of attitude I had. That's followed me all the way into Africa.
In interviews in the run-up to the fight, Ali parodies Foreman's looping punching style, in addition to his mean tough guy image.
Now you know I'm bad. Only last week I murdered a rock, injured a stone, hospitalized a brick.
Foreman responds by laughing off Ali's stick and move game plan when questioned in interviews.
Well, he says now he can stick and run and beat you.
Well, he'll definitely have to do it to beat me. Stick and run. I'm going to be running him through the jungle.
Heading into Africa, both fighters initially try to ingratiate themselves by dressing in what they perceive as cultural African clothing. However, Foreman makes a huge PR mistake. Foreman is known as a dog lover.
The teddy bear was lurking under there even while the grizzly bear was being formed at that age. He couldn't look at a stray dog without wanting to hug it and bring it home.
The dog Foreman brings with him was used by the Belgian police during their occupation of the African nation.
And it frightened the bejabbers out of him.
Foreman secludes himself in an upmarket hotel to finalize his training. Ali trains at a facility south, but goes out on training runs and makes much more of an effort to ingratiate himself with the people of Zaire. In one of Foreman's final training sessions before the fight, he sustains a cut in training, ruling him out of the fight at the scheduled date. Ali, feeling he was peaking for the fight and missing home comforts, was initially devastated by the news.
If there ever has been any disappointments in sports, any setbacks or rainy days to stop the ball game, anything, this is the worst of all time.
When Foreman is asked about the delay at a press conference, Foreman, who had so often appeared as a caricature of a bully in the ring, sounds off on the delay, showing a deeper and more eccentric side.
The fight would be rescheduled, but when it happened, it would be actually intended for that time. Fate intended it for another time.
In later years, Ali's handlers would describe the delay as a perfect storm scenario that swung the momentum in his direction. Foreman's final month of preparation would take place consisting entirely of non-contact training. Meanwhile, Ali, forced to train under the pressure, facing his most intimidating opponent since Sonny Liston, devoid of his usual home comforts and distractions, gets arguably the sharpest he has ever been in his career.
It was that 30 days finally realized that nobody was really rooting for him.
By fight time, I doubt that there were more than a handful of people in Zaire who weren't rooting for Ali.
Going into the bout, Ali has broadcast that he plans to use a stick and move game plan.
Go back and tell the man to be ready for a dance.
Foreman has said that he himself had no particular game plan, although his coaches have prepared him to counter Ali's movement.
And everybody's seen what I do. I go out and try to do the same thing to everybody. I won't be trying to change tactics.
When the fight begins, Ali goes straight at Foreman, blasting him with right hands that bounce Foreman's head around.
He hit me with the fastest 1-2 combination I'd ever seen, let alone been hit with.
Ali looks like he's ready to go here. Drop that left hook.
Ali will later state that his predictions of dancing were a mind game to throw Foreman off.
I did plan not to dance as much as I publicized. I publicized a lot of dancing to throw the man off track. His trainers, his sparring partners.
Ali figured out the one punch Foreman's not prepared for is a right-hand lead. He's expecting me to dance. I'm not going to dance. I'm going to hit him with right hand. I'm going to knock him out in the first round.
Midway through the first round, Foreman grins at Ali, but he's clearly intimidated, never having faced a fighter with as much hand speed. Foreman begins the second round by trying to use a long guard and parry the punches of Ali. Early in the round, Foreman lands a 1-2 to the jaw of Ali. As Foreman pressures Ali, Ali retreats to the ropes. Late in the round, Ali lands a flush 1-2 on Foreman. He later lands 4 straight punches. The round ends with Foreman pushing Ali up against the ropes.
At the end of the second round, I said, oh my God, we're going to lose this fight.
They asked me when Muhammad Ali took the title from me, did he hurt me? And there I am with a big black eye. And they asked me, did it hurt?
Muhammad Ali is punishing George Foreman even though he is on the rope. He is getting some tremendous blows in, and at some point that can tell on Foreman.
To begin the third round, Ali retreats to the ropes and drills Foreman with a 1-2 straight down the pipe. Later in the round, Foreman attacks Ali with hooks to the body. Ali comes off the ropes and nails Foreman again.
There's the chant, Ali Boumaier. That means Ali, kill him.
Foreman connects against Ali with punches on the ropes, but he's already starting to look arm-weary. Just before the end of the third round, Ali lands a right hand whilst retreating near the centre of the ring. To begin the fourth round, Foreman pressures Ali to the ropes without throwing particularly meaningful punches. The fighters tie up as the fourth round ascends into a wrestling match. Foreman unloads against Ali on the ropes at the beginning of the fifth round. Ali will spend most of the round on the ropes as Foreman looks like he's starting to gain confidence. At the end of the fifth round, Ali comes off the ropes and starts to light Foreman up. Ali dominates the start of the sixth round with his jab. Foreman has success with straighter punches than he's been throwing elsewhere in the fight. To begin the seventh round, Ali goes straight to the ropes. Ali will spend the majority of the round on the ropes.
I got a feeling that George's not gonna make it.
And he said, "Is that all you got, George?" And I remember thinking, yep, that's about it.
Late in the eighth round, Ali lands a combo that sends Foreman to the canvas like an ungainly cart horse. With the crowd screaming for his execution, Foreman is counted out.
The thing that I've always remembered was that the beaten fighter, and he was very much favored to win that, suddenly becomes about the size of a pygmy.
Foreman, in later years, would speak candidly about the devastation he felt after the loss. Initially, he seemingly went through a period of shock.
Look at that face, a man who can scarcely believe what has happened to him.
This would turn to denial as he went about his business over the next couple of days and talked to more and more people.
From pride to pity, devastation like I've never felt.
Oh, I was angry. I came up with every excuse in the world.
Feeling he needed a break from boxing, Foreman would go out on the party scene. Foreman would return to the ring on April 26, 1975 in Toronto. Having made several excuses in the wake of the Ali loss, Foreman would put much of the blame on his trainer Dick Sadler. His PR campaign has done little to endear him to the Toronto crowd. Muhammad Ali at ringside is the firm fan favourite of the two. Foreman's first opponent of the night will be Alonzo Johnson, a sparsely active 40-year-old with a 23 wins and 19 losses record. Foreman spends most of the first round clowning. Foreman drops Johnson at the start of the second round after a series of light-looking left hands. Foreman drops Johnson again in the second round with 2 right hands and the ref calls the fight. Foreman's next opponent will be a 14-5 Terry Judge. Unlike other opponents going in, Judge has been very optimistic about his chances and he initially appears game. After Judge lands some punches early, Foreman starts to beat him up against the ropes later in the round. After an overhand right uppercut combo, Foreman drops Judge and walks over to Ali to boast. Foreman drops Judge in the second round with a counter right hand and the ref calls the fight. Foreman offers his commiseration to Judge. It's not clear if it's in a patronising way, but Judge takes exception and a brawl ensues. Foreman is heckled by the crowd who throw objects into the ring. Foreman's next opponent will be Terry Daniels. Daniels will initially box and move well, having success against Foreman. A mugging in the corner in the second round will change the flow of the fight. When the ref calls the fight, slightly prematurely after a Foreman counter right, a second brawl ensues where Foreman goes after Daniels' cornerman. Foreman's next opponent will be Charlie Polite. Polite will survive a knockdown, but he spends the majority of the fight using movement or emulating Ali's tactics against the ropes, and he manages to survive the 3-round distance. To begin bout 5, Foreman gets in another altercation, this time with his cornerman, who is his cousin. Foreman's 5th opponent will be Boone Kirkman. Foreman saves his best effort till last. He unloads a barrage of punches against Kirkman, flooring him at the end of round 1. However, having already fought 4 other guys, Foreman lacks the gas to finish it off. Foreman and Kirkman show respect at the final bell, which seems to temporarily cool Foreman off. Foreman denies credit to Ali for the win in Zaire in the post-fight interview.
He might be good, but as long as I'm around, he's second best.
The event may have done something to restore Foreman's reputation as a formidable heavyweight if that were ever in question, but overall the event has been an unmitigated disaster that has made Foreman, if possible, even more unpopular. The only redeeming part of the event for Foreman is that he blanks Don King at the post-fight interview.
Thank you very much.
George, a great show. I'm very proud of you. And George, will you be ready to go about?
All right.
After the Toronto exhibition, Foreman will make his official return to action 15 months later against Ron Lyle. Lyle had suffered a competitive defeat to Ali a couple of months earlier and very much represented an elite-level fighter. Coming into the bout, Foreman has been trying to significantly refine his game, working with the trainer Gil Clancy. After a feeling-out process, Lyle hurts Foreman with an overhand right. Foreman holds on to survive the round. Foreman hurts Lyle in the second round. As Foreman goes in for the kill against the ropes, he shows an improved attack, but the round ends early due to a timekeeping error. The fighters trade in the third round before Lyle adopts defensive tactics and goes to the ropes. Lowell comes out aggressive at the start of the 4th round and drops Foreman. Foreman gets back to his feet and the fight becomes a barroom brawl with both fighters trading furious leather. Lowell gets dropped and gets back to his feet, looking very wobbly. As the fighters trade at the end of the 4th, Lowell drops Foreman.
I remember thinking, before I lose, I'll die. So he's going to have to kill me tonight.
The fighters trade more through the 5th and Foreman looks like he's ready to go. Somehow Foreman survives. He manages to trap Lowell in the corner at the end of the 5th round and pelt away till he scores a TKO. Next up for Foreman will be a rematch with Joe Frazier. When the fighters are introduced, Foreman is hugely unpopular in comparison to Frazier. Changing his game for the start of the fight, Frazier adopts a more upright stance and shows slick head movement in evading Foreman's jab. Towards the end of the 1st round, Frazier gets trapped against the ropes. He does manage to lean away from some of Foreman's punches, but the uppercuts are a major thorn in his side. Frazier has success with left hooks on the back foot in the 2nd round, but he also gets trapped on the ropes, which looks very dicey. Foreman hurts Frazier in the 3rd round with a right hand left hook combo. He follows up and deals out a huge amount of punishment. Frazier is showing a much better ability to take Foreman's punches, but the action becomes one-sided. Foreman hurts Frazier at the start of the 4th with a stray right hand. Foreman seems to time Frazier better this round, dodging several of his left hooks, although he appears to be pacing himself this round. Foreman unloads a barrage against Frazier at the start of the 5th round. Frazier is finally concussed and forced to go down. After a 2nd dramatic knockdown, the fight is called. Foreman will follow up the Frazier victory with a knockout victory over Scott Ledoux, a bludgeoning stoppage victory over John Dino Dennis, and a knockout victory over Pedro Augusto, before going into a bout with Jimmy Young. Young had been involved in a very competitive matchup with Ali 11 months earlier. He had also put forward a more impressive display than Foreman in beating Ron Lyle twice, so the matchup has very real title shot implications, especially if the winner is Foreman.
Commissions were saying, look, if George Foreman fight Jimmy Young, the winner of that fight, if George wins, we're going to demand Ali fight Foreman, or he's going to be stripped of his title.
Going into the matchup, a lot is made of what is perceived as some of Foreman's dirty tactics. Although parries, which are a legal technique, make up much of Foreman's defense, some of his manhandling technique represents an illegal move that is rarely enforced.
I had reporters that hated him. They'd pull for anybody that he fought because they wanted to see him beaten.
One writer had a whole story about George training with dirty tactics.
His habit of hitting fighters once he's knocked them down has done little to dissuade the focus on his status as a dirty fighter coming into the fight. However, when the action begins, of the two is Young, if anyone, who skirts the rules. He initiates several clinches without throwing, usually following them up with complaints to the referee about Foreman. In the 3rd round, after more complaints from Young, the referee deducts a point from Foreman.
But he told each judge to take away a point from George Foreman. Frankly, I couldn't see the basis for that.
In the 4th round, after more Young complaints and a warning from the referee, debris is thrown into the ring at Foreman. After an even stop-start first 6 rounds, in the 7th round Foreman badly hurts Young. Young is staggered all over the ring through the round, but somehow recovers enough by the end of the round to fire back at Foreman. As Young recovers over the 8th, 9th and 10th, the fight is very even going into the 11th. During the 11th, Foreman looks exhausted, barely throwing anything, getting wobbled at one stage. In the 12th, Young drops an exhausted Foreman. Foreman isn't badly hurt, but the gloves touch down and the referee calls it a knockdown. When the decision is announced, it goes to Jimmy Young. Foreman initially seems annoyed that he lost and declines an interview.
George, first your comment on the kind of fight Jimmy Young fought. No comment, Howard.
However, when he heads back to the locker room and the shower room, what happens next will be retold extensively in later years.
He went through something for about an hour at least, in the dressing room with all the screaming and hollering going on.
After the fight was over, he suffered hallucinations in the locker room.
The stories range from accounts where Foreman is overcome by the heat in what was an extremely hot environment, to a precisely described religious experience, to a descent into madness where Foreman was completely volatile and nonsensical.
Maybe losing was too much for him to absorb.
I went into the dressing room when I heard the shouting and commotion, And it was a sight you'll never forget. It just...
I was scratched there. Everybody scratched. They looked at each other. And so quite natural, we thought, well, he didn't get hit that hard in the ring, so it can't be anything wrong with his mind.
And I saw blood coming down my forehead. No one else did. And I told my masseur, Mr. Fuller, move your hand. He's bleeding where they crucified him. And I started screaming, Jesus Christ was come alive in me. And I fought 8 men to get in the shower and started screaming, I'm clean, born again, hallelujah.
I'd taken off my clothes. I said, I gotta go tell the world. I guess they were saying, you gotta put some clothes on, George. I remember being strapped down in a little stretcher and taken to the hospital.
The way he tells it is that the hand of God showed him exactly what eternal death looks like.
Foreman, who had been casually attending church in the recent years before the fight, is treated for heat exhaustion on the night of the fight, but from this time forward, he will be a born-again Christian. Foreman would immediately exile himself from the boxing world and instead immerse himself in religious circles.
I mean, were you embarrassed?
I was embarrassed. I mean, no doubt about it. It's something you make fun of and talk about, and the way I did, I just wouldn't be able to come out, so I hid for a long time.
Some months later, he would re-emerge on televangelist Dr. Robert Schuler's show. He appears on the show slightly offbeat, parroting words.
And I'm telling you, I'm happy. I'm happy. Yeah. I'm happy.
I believe it. I really do.
I'm happy.
Foreman's religious episodes don't end with the locker room incident after his loss to Jimmy Young. On one occasion, he reads a passage from the Bible that says, "When you have finished God's work, you will know it, and it will be time."
He checks into the hotel and he decides he's going to die. Closes the door, doesn't eat, reads the Bible. 2 or 3 days later, he's still alive.
After he finds himself alive after a couple of days, he decides something went wrong.
I was a little concerned about whether or not somebody might have had him picked up one day on a mental health warrant.
Within 1 year of the loss to Jimmy Young, Foreman is seen with a shaved head and nearly 100 pounds heavier. Foreman becomes extremely pious in a short space of time and decides to give away many of his material possessions.
But he was giving away cars, big screen TVs, furniture.
The start of Foreman's religious journey can likely be seen as a mellowing of his character. Nevertheless, there are still a few disturbing incidents. On one occasion, he tells his sisters and extended family that they need to be baptized or else eternally damned.
So I say, Mama, what is wrong with him? What is wrong? And she started crying, and I started crying, and I'm about to do it again.
When Foreman meets an old business associate who had robbed him blind, Foreman, who had tried to take a hit out on the man, shows his newfound Christian spirit in completely turning the other cheek.
And the guy, when he saw George, started running away, and George took that long arm and pulled him back, and he said, "Come here, Leroy, you're my friend, you're my buddy."
Whilst this newfound mellowness can be considered to his credit to an extent, it immediately appears an overcompensation. Where he had once displayed a large amount of toughness and meanness in the ring, he now appears at the opposite end of the extreme.
That's an emotional journey you take while trying to be heavyweight champ of the world.
Keen to spread the religious message that had touched him, Foreman sets up a low-budget operation to spread the message on street corners.
George had this little kind of boom box that ran on batteries with a microphone, walked out on a street corner by a stoplight.
I put down boxing and everything that had to do with boxing so that people could learn about Jesus Christ.
And here he is, standing on the corner, doing something that when you see people doing, you say, "Oh, that poor guy, he's off his rocker."
After serving an unofficial apprenticeship of sorts preaching on street corners, Foreman would found the Church of the Lord Jesus Christ in 1980. Foreman would seem to maintain a more even keel in the coming years as he became more involved in the religious scene.
For some reason, I was no longer angry at anyone.
However, one aspect of his personal life that remained turbulent was his romantic life. Having been through 3 marriages and divorces since beating Joe Frazier in 1983, there would be unrest in his 4th marriage.
I look up one day, and I woke up one day and I came home, and all my kids were gone. I had 2 kids just disappeared, a son and a daughter.
Foreman would find that his wife had run away with the kids to the Caribbean island of St. Lucia.
He goes down there and he organizes this whole Mission Impossible escapade.
When he takes his kids back to the hotel he is staying, the police attempt to arrest him, telling him he has 24 hours to hand over his kids.
I heard someone, I said, to get my kids, you're going to have to kill me. I heard someone say, kill him then.
As Foreman searches for a desperate escape, the only route out of the country will be on a marijuana smuggling boat.
Here's these Rastafarians who are rolling dope, taking him to freedom.
Back in US courts, Foreman will win custody of his kids from this marriage. On his trip to St. Lucia, Foreman met Mary Joan Martelli, who had been working as a nanny to his kids. The pair will eventually become married, and defying all convention, Foreman's fifth marriage will be his first stable one. Preaching in his church, Foreman will be approached by a woman who has a troubled son involved in violent crime. She asks Foreman if she could get him involved in boxing. The son will eventually go to jail after being involved in gang-related violence.
And this kid would end up shooting a storekeep, and the storekeep shot his friend. Lives devastated because I didn't want to be associated with sports anymore.
Foreman will then go on to open the George Foreman Youth Centre, having his eyes opened that boxing could eventually be a benefit rather than a hindrance to troubled youth. As Foreman teaches the kids at the youth centre, he starts to develop a newfound appreciation for boxing as a craft.
From that point on, I started to not only be happy about my life, but be happy about the life I lived before. Teaching other kids, get the chip off your shoulder. You don't need to be angry. It's an honorable sport.
When he opened the George Foreman Youth Center, he was happy going to do that every day. I would jump in the car with him, and he was motivated to go to the youth center and work with kids.
With it now being nearly 10 years since his last boxing payday, Foreman finds himself in dire financial need.
Pure and simple. I was in a terrible state as far as finances.
Really?
I lost a lot of money.
The story is in equal parts legendary and absurd. Foreman, well over £300, calls his family to the dinner table. He there announces to the family that with the odds stacked firmly against him, he'll be returning to the boxing ring.
Of course, when your father says, hey, I'm going to come back to boxing and be the heavyweight champion of the world, you say, okay, Dad.
I thought he was silly, to be honest. 10 years, the man is now making a comeback.
News of Foreman's comeback attempt reaches Larry Merchant.
Oh, my recollection when George came back was, what? He must need money.
This will prove to be the only prediction Merchant gets right during Foreman's comeback. Although Foreman had kept in shape to a basic extent during his time off with general fitness such as jogging and weight training, he has gone 10 years without doing any boxing training.
10 years, I didn't even shadow box.
He is also over £300 when he begins training for the comeback.
The undisputed, the undefeated heavyweight champion of the world.
To make matters all the more ambitious, Foreman sets his sights on not just any heavyweight champion, but one of the most explosive and destructive heavyweight champions ever. The comeback begins in Sacramento, California in 1987 against former Mike Tyson opponent Steve Zalski. Foreman has assumed the role of manager to himself, and to those who will listen has outlined a 3-year plan to become heavyweight champion of the world.
He started the comeback at 325 pounds.
And Foreman considers himself a prospect.
But I'm going to start from the bottom. I know how to promote. I know how to recreate. I know how to get myself back in shape. I was going to start from the bottom and work my way up, and that takes 3 years minimum.
Showing a surprising lack of ring rust, Foreman will dominate Zalski en route to a 5th round stoppage. In contrast to his former career where he made a habit of clubbing grounded opponents, this time he actually asked the referee to stop the fight. After going 7-0 in the comeback, Foreman will take a significant step up in competition when he faces former light heavyweight and cruiserweight world champion Dwight Mohamed Kwawi. Going into the bout, Foreman gets himself down to 235 pounds. Kwawi, in contrast, has let himself go slightly from his light heavyweight frame. When the fight begins, Kwawi goes straight after Foreman, looking to blast him out in the first round. Foreman shows he still retains a strong jaw in weathering the storm. Foreman begins the second round by connecting against Kwawi. To begin the third round, a frustrated Foreman thumps the kidneys of Kwawi. Kwawi goes down. It's not clear if that's to embellish the foul or because he's hurt, but the referee renders no decision. In the fourth round, the fight becomes a ponderous affair, and the crowd starts to boo. In the sixth round, Foreman lands a big combo. Kwawi fakes like he's going to go down, but comes back throwing punches. Later in the round, Foreman lands a left hook / uppercut combo, and Kwawi falls into the ropes. It should have been scored and knocked down, but the referee makes no call. After a Foreman barrage in the 7th round, Kwawi walks off and the ref calls the fight. Foreman's win does little to impress Gil Clancy.
We thought
nothing sparkling about the fight whatsoever.
After the win over Quarry, Foreman would take a step backwards before going forwards, feeling he is not yet prepared for a top 10 opponent. After racking up 9 stoppage victories, he would take on a flagging prospect in Burt Cooper. Cooper's speed and skills are expected to be a problem going into the fight, but Foreman says he's unimpressed with what he's seen. After Foreman dominates the first 2 rounds, Cooper quits on his stool. After another stoppage win, Foreman will appear on his first pay-per-view event of the comeback. His opponent, Jerry Cooney, had been a contender for the heavyweight championship himself at one point. Going into his title shot with Larry Holmes, he divided fan and expert opinion. He ended up coming up short, but is still highly regarded. The one advantage Foreman has over Cooney at this point is his activity. Going into the fight, Cooney chooses to take no tune-up fights, despite 3 years of inactivity. It would appear Foreman is his tune-up fight. Cooney boxes and moves well early. At the end of the first round, Foreman breaks up his rhythm with some roughhouse exchanges, though he gets clubbed for his efforts. Foreman lands a big left uppercut that hurts Cooney. He follows up and Cooney gets dropped. Foreman follows up with an uppercut that knocks Cooney out. Interviewed by David Letterman the day after the fight, Foreman reiterates his desire to face Mike Tyson.
Now, is this I want this happen? Mike Tyson. Is it going to happen? I will assure you I'll do it in the same fashion, 1 or 2 rounds. I guarantee you.
Going into his February 1990 title defense against James Douglas, it would be fair to say that Mike Tyson is a favorite.
Larry, what are we about to see? Another 90-second annihilation?
Douglas has fought his best fighters against the best fighters he's fought, so perhaps we'll get a few rounds.
His opponent, James Buster Douglas, is known as a slick boxer. However, he has had stamina issues in the past. A boxer who can be slick for some rounds whilst needing to take a breather in others is probably not the best combination to fight a puncher as ferocious as Tyson. However, to most observers, Douglas' skills are an irrelevant factor. He is expected to get blown away by Tyson. A spanner is thrown into the works in terms of Douglas' preparation. 23 days before the fight, his mother dies unexpectedly of a stroke. It is not clear what effect this will have on Douglas' mental state. When the fight begins, Douglas shows good foot speed in staying away from Tyson. To the viewing public's surprise, Douglas lands a stiff right hand to the head of Tyson midway through the first. Douglas starts to outbox Tyson with piston-like straight shots. To begin the second round, Douglas shrugs off Tyson and starts to hammer him with punches. Douglas continues to outbox Tyson at distance through the third and fourth rounds, tying him up when they get close. Douglas lands a big right hand to begin the fifth. Through the fifth round, Douglas grows with confidence and Tyson starts to look fatigued. After more right hands, Tyson looks wobbled. It would later emerge that Tyson had been refusing to go out on training runs.
He no longer wanted me to run with him. He didn't want to be bothered. He said, if they come and get me to run, I'm leaving up out of here.
Tyson manages to claw back the 6th round. Between rounds, he is treated for a swollen eye. Despite the hundreds of millions of dollars he has earned, his corner are bafflingly ill-prepared. Instead of treating him with an inswell as a standard practice, he is instead treated with what is essentially a water balloon. Through the 7th round, Douglas continues to outbox Tyson at distance and then tie him up at close quarters. Towards the end of the 8th round, Douglas starts to hammer away at Tyson on the ropes. With Douglas looking like he has an eye on the finish, Tyson lands a devastating counter right hand. Douglas is badly hurt, but he beats the count and the round ends immediately. Tyson goes to the finish in the 9th, but Douglas fires back twice as hard. Tyson gets wobbled against the ropes and needs to use them to survive. As an exhausted Tyson staggers around the ring in the 10th, Douglas lands a barrage that floors Tyson, knocking him out for the count. Thus the heavyweight title with the various sanctioning bodies, and most importantly the lineal heavyweight title, which dates back to the likes of John L. Sullivan, Jack Dempsey, Rocky Marciano and Muhammad Ali, was now possessed by James Buster Douglas. Going into his bout with Adelson Rodriguez in June 1990, Foreman seems to be in a better mood than the version of him that plodded past Quarry 2 years earlier.
And when I miss Adelson Rodriguez with my right hand, then my left, I'm going to belly bump him. He's going to be in trouble.
Despite his resurgent form, Larry Merchant is still dismissive of Foreman's prospects of being a significant player in the now more open heavyweight landscape.
When people started to take him seriously because they were tantalized by a charming, fat old heavyweight, I just swooned at their gullibility.
Merchant does, however, recognise that Foreman is fighting a more significant opponent than Mike Tyson, who was on the comeback trail.
One other thing I didn't expect to see, Jim, a doubleheader, Tyson-Foreman, in which Foreman is fighting the more formidable opponent.
Rodriguez will be the first opponent Foreman has fought in the top 10 as recognised by some governing bodies and journalists. The fight will consist of 1.5 rounds of ineffective boxing and moving from Rodriguez before Foreman unleashes a brutal combo, knocking Rodriguez out with a left hook. After the fight, Sugar Ray Leonard starts to take George more seriously.
I expected more from Rodriguez, but apparently George Foreman has much more to offer than we are led to believe.
Meanwhile, Larry Merchant proves to be a tougher critic.
Well, that's what Rodriguez is here for.
Foreman will fight again 6 weeks later, brutalizing Ken Lagusta. James Buster Douglas will make the first defense of his heavyweight crown against Evander Holyfield in October 1990. Going into the fight, Douglas causes a stir when he weighs in at 246 pounds, 15 pounds higher than when he fought Tyson. Holyfield, in contrast, looks a fit and trim 208 pounds. During the fight itself, Douglas will fail to recapture the form he showed against Tyson. A straight right hand from Holyfield in the third round knocks him out for the count. For the first defense of his heavyweight crown, Evander Holyfield would choose to take on Foreman, as Foreman is now seen as one of the biggest draws in the sport. Going into the fight, Foreman is a big underdog with current journalists and commentators, over some of the old guard, perhaps voting with their hearts rather than their minds, are backing Foreman.
One national newspaper polled 7 former heavyweight champions, and 6 of them, among them the biggest names in the history of the sport, picked Foreman to win this fight.
Holyfield takes the first round as Foreman scores with a few jabs, but generally looks tentative. Foreman starts to land some combos towards the end of the second round, giving him the round. Just over a minute into the third round, Foreman lands a left hand that staggers Holyfield. At the end of the third round, Holyfield lands a barrage that staggers Foreman. Holyfield staggers Foreman again near the end of the fourth round. Holyfield lands more combos to begin the fifth as the HBO commentary team starts to write him off.
And although it's only round 5, for Big George, it may be getting late.
At the end of the round, Foreman takes over and lands heavy-handed blows against Holyfield. After an overhand right displaces Holyfield at the start of the 7th, Foreman comes on strong and starts to batter Holyfield. Holyfield fires back at Foreman with a barrage of unanswered punches. Holyfield takes the 8th round with some big counter right hands. At the end of the 9th, Holyfield badly hurts Foreman and he looks the closest he has yet to going down. Through the 11th and 12th, Foreman continues to look for big punches whilst Holyfield continues to box. Holyfield starts to initiate clinches, seemingly confident these are held on points. Foreman looks heavily battered by the end of the fight, though he has landed big punches throughout. Larry Merchant is not overly impressed.
There's so much sentiment here because it's been a one-sided fight, virtually a massacre.
The fight goes to a decision and Holyfield is declared the winner. Although Larry Merchant has not been overly impressed by Foreman's performance, other commentators elsewhere have been. The bout makes the cover of the Ring magazine in the wake of the bout.
And he went in there and was extremely competitive with Evander Holyfield, had a chance to win the fight.
He's now proved himself going into the cauldron against the heavyweight champion and nearly winning.
Foreman attempts to rebound 8 months later against former pro football player Jimmy Ellis. In the build-up, Foreman reiterates his desire to win the heavyweight championship, an achievement he now calls the impossible dream.
No longer am I an angry man. The satisfaction I now get is achieving what others consider to be impossible dreams.
The fight with Ellis will be very one-sided. Foreman wobbles Ellis, and reinforcing his newfound nice guy image shows a lack of killer instinct in not fighting Ellis off. Under fire, referee Richard Steele motions to stop the fight, then changes his mind. Finally, Steele calls the fight off in the third round. Seeking a Holyfield rematch, Foreman will fight again 4 months later against heavyweight contender Alex Stewart. When the fight begins, there is a stark contrast between the postures of each fighter. Stewart looks like a picture of nerves and tension, whilst Foreman by contrast looks more relaxed. To begin the second round, Foreman knocks Stewart down in a messy exchange. A 1-2 later in the round will put Stewart down again. Foreman hurts Stewart in the third round, and as with his previous fight against Jimmy Ellis, shows a reluctance to finish. To begin the fourth round, Stewart seems to relax after the jitters that he was feeling early in the fight, and he boxes very effectively. Though Foreman's cheek is swelling, he comes back in the fifth, scoring points and outworks Stewart. Stewart outboxes Foreman through the 6th round. Foreman's face looks badly swollen and it looks like he might be stopped. In the 8th round, Foreman hurts Stewart with a big uppercut. He goes in for the finish, but Stewart fights back. Foreman is outboxed for the final 2 rounds. Despite Stewart looking the fresher man, he is oddly conservative. By the end of the fight, Foreman is as badly beaten as you will see a fighter. The fight goes to a decision and Foreman takes a close, controversial decision, presumably due to the early rounds he banked. After the fight, Foreman questions if he should have shown more killer instinct when he hurt Stewart in the early rounds.
I really could have, but I didn't want to hurt the kid. I hit him with a shot and looked at the ref, and now the kid hurting me.
On 13th of November 1992, Evander Holyfield will defend his heavyweight crown of various governing bodies and his metaphorical lineal heavyweight title against yet another prodigal heavyweight contender, Riddick Bowe. Bowe is known as a talented heavyweight who lacks discipline, but he has got himself into good shape for his title shot.
It was perhaps the best training camp that we've ever had. Bowe was ready to fight for the title.
The early rounds of the bout are fiercely and evenly contested, with both fighters landing solid shots. Heading into the later rounds, it looks like it might come down to who wants it more. Holyfield is known for doing a sophisticated training routine with more science than quantum physics. Bowe, in contrast, has generally relied on old-school boxing training mixed in with fluctuating amounts of junk food. To the surprise of many, it is Holyfield who starts to look fatigued first, fading by the 8th or 9th. A Bowe uppercut badly hurts Holyfield in the 10th, and Bowe follows up. Later in the round, palpably digging deep to his core, Holyfield rallies back. Bowe drops an exhausted Holyfield in the 11th round. An exhausted Holyfield digs deep to go the distance in what has been an entertaining affair that has won him many new fans, but he has dropped as many as 5 or 6 points in a row on some cards, and definitely the last 3 rounds, so there is no controversy when Riddick Bowe is declared the winner and the new WBC, WBA and IBF heavyweight champion. At this point, some contention creeps into Bowe's status as the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. Having stopped Razor Ruddock in impressive fashion 1 month before Bowe Holyfield, Lennox Lewis is installed by the WBC as their #1 contender. When the fight falls through after a contract dispute, Bowe famously throws the WBC belt into the garbage. The WBC would then strip Bowe. Bowe throwing the belt into the garbage would later be described as an act of ducking, but at the time Bowe was the consensus #1 heavyweight in the world, whilst Lewis was still developing. In reality, dropping the belt into the garbage was as much a slight to the WBC as it was to Lewis' contract demands. Lewis would fight Frank Bruno for the WBC title, landing a big punch in a very dicey come-from-behind victory. He would go on to get knocked out by Oliver McCall in 1994 as the WBC title picture gets very muddled. Meanwhile, the lineal title, as held by Riddick Bowe, along with the WBA and IBF heavyweight titles, are very much considered the true heavyweight title as held by the #1 heavyweight in the world. After his war with Alex Stewart, Foreman returned to the ring against Pierre Coetzee in January 1993. In the build-up to the fight, Foreman arranges a deal to star in his own TV show, George. The TV show will not have an obvious or immediate effect on his performance as he dominates Coetzee for 8 rounds behind the jab before the referee calls halt to the contest in round 8. In June of 1993, Foreman, now 44, will fight Tommy Morrison for the meaningless WBO heavyweight title. Foreman's preparations will not be ideal due to his commitments to the TV show George.
Before the Tommy Morrison fight, he was hitting the bag on the set of George on the TV show, you know.
Foreman will have problems measuring distance early. Midway through the 2nd round, Morrison lands an overhand right that wobbles Foreman. Foreman fires back in the same round, showing an improved straight right hand. Morrison continues to outbox Foreman on the back foot, moving in and out of range at his speed, not Foreman's. By the end of the 3rd round, Morrison's game plans appears to be working, although he's sucking wind. Things will become closer over the middle rounds. In the 7th round, a gassed Morrison will turn his back and walk away from Foreman, as the crowd boo heavily. Foreman lands a big left hand to the jaw of Morrison. Morrison boxes and jogs away from Foreman in the 9th. When Morrison gets cornered by Foreman, Foreman looks bizarrely hesitant. Foreman wobbles a fatigued Morrison in the 10th. Morrison boxes and runs again through the 11th and 12th. The fight goes to a decision. It has been a slightly bizarre fight to watch and score, not because Morrison boxed on the back foot, but rather because he literally ran away at some points. Based off clean effective punching, Torrey Morrison is declared a winner in non-controversial fashion. Foreman hints at retirement in the post-fight interview, but it's not completely conclusive. After making 2 defenses of his heavyweight crown, Riddick Bowe will defend against Evander Holyfield in November '93. Coming into the bout, Holyfield has improved his endurance, with his trainer now saying they are focused equally on upper and lower body endurance. He has also bulked up 9 pounds from their first meeting. It's not clear how he would have improved his endurance and added mass, but rumours of steroids swirl. Bowe, in contrast, has added 11 pounds and appears to not be in an overly constructive way. After the fighters split the early rounds, in the 6th round, Holyfield hurts Bowe. Midway through the 7th round, a parachutist attempts to enter the ring. There is much speculation as to who the man is.
My first thought was it was an attempt on either Farrakhan or Jesse Jackson's life.
It would turn out to be a rogue man with mental illness. When the action resumes, Bowe is rejuvenated, but he still gets outworked by Holyfield. The bout goes to a decision, and Evander Holyfield is declared once again the heavyweight champion. Holyfield will defend his heavyweight title 6 months later against former light heavyweight champion Michael Moorer. After Holyfield edges a close first round, in the 2nd round he knocks Moorer down. Moorer comes back in the 4th and 5th rounds and starts to rock Holyfield. Moorer dominates a gassed-looking Holyfield through the 6th. Holyfield complains about his left shoulder between rounds. Moorer pulls ahead in the late rounds. He lands combos against Holyfield from his southpaw stance. At the bell, Moorer looks triumphant whilst Holyfield looks anxious and negative. The bout goes to a decision and Moorer is declared the winner. When the dust settles after the Moorer-Holyfield fight, it will come out that Holyfield has developed an issue with his heart.
See, with his heart, though, is the elasticity is not quite normal, that it doesn't expand.
As Moorer looks for a challenger for his first title defense, there is no immediately obvious choice. Going in for the kill, Tommy Morrison would get knocked out by Michael Bent. Mike Tyson is in jail. Lennox Lewis is busy getting knocked out by Oliver McCall. Riddick Bowe is coming off the loss to Holyfield and a no contest after hitting a down Buster Mathis Jr., whilst Holyfield is dealing with his heart issue. Foreman becomes ignited by the prospect of another heavyweight title shot.
Said, George, you can't kid me. You want to fight Michael Moorer. And he said more than anything else in the world, get me that fight.
Foreman gets his title shot and embarks on the training camp of a lifetime.
I was able to get out there and get that road work back in. I skipped it up from 3 miles as the original champion to 10 miles.
Going into the fight, Foreman has reason to be positive. Of their common opponents, the Alex Stewart, who Foreman was involved in a very close fight with, hurt Moorer worse than he ever hurt Foreman. More optimistically, the Burt Cooper, who Foreman beat in 2 easy rounds in 1989, dropped Foreman twice. The problems for Foreman are that he will be 45 years old by the time he faces Moorer. He will also have developed ring rust, not having fought for 17 months. To begin the fight, Foreman starts pouring at the lead right hand of Moorer and throwing jabs. Through the first round, it becomes apparent that Foreman has changed his guard for this fight. He comes out with one hand in front of the other in a more traditional boxing guard. Elsewhere in the comeback, Foreman has adopted a cross-arm guard.
And with Michael Moorer, no one noticed. I stopped that and just kept my hand traditionally up.
The decision to adopt this guard could be seen as an adjustment to Moorer's southpaw stance. It could also be seen as an attempt to play to win that will leave him more open but increase his offensive capabilities. Between rounds, Moorer is warned about catching a big punch from Foreman.
What he's trying to do is set you up for one shot. Listen to me.
And he conned us into standing in front of him. You know, big hamburger eating, grinning.
Moorer lands jabs at will through the 3rd round, but he's having problems landing power shots. Through the 4th and 5th, Moorer's tactics become a bit incongruent.
I'm surprised that Moorer is not trying to throw more body punches. He's just out there fencing with George.
He's dominating the fight with the jab, but he's not moving a great deal. He shows good reflexes, slipping Foreman's punches, but there's not a lot of shoulder movement and his head looks static.
Again, Moorer is trying to fence with a bigger man.
It appears his respect for Foreman is so low that he will try to take him out with a power jab. Foreman is having problems connecting, but he looks the more dangerous puncher. In the 7th round, Larry Merchant puts his foot in his mouth for the final time in Foreman's career.
I think the myth of George's power has been exposed by Michael Moorer.
Foreman hurts Moorer in the 8th with the biggest right hand of the fight. A Moorer left hand sends an off-balance Foreman stumbling. Moorer throws more left hands in the 9th. some tentative and one with authority as he looks to break through Foreman's defense. He appears indecisive as to whether to push for the KO.
In the corner, Angelo Dundee upset me.
After getting a talking to from Angelo Dundee in the corner, Foreman comes out blazing as much as a 45-year-old man can in the 10th round. After a barrage of punches, a straight right hand puts Mora down to trigger the second iconic line of Foreman's career.
It happened! It happened! The impossible dream has happened. Heavyweight history has happened.
Moorer later told me that he was basically out on his feet before the last 1-2.
In the immediate aftermath of the fight, a shell-shocked Mora is uncommonly gracious for a defeated heavyweight boxing champion.
Well, I can say the best man won tonight.
A humbled Larry Merchant finally pays respect to Foreman.
And if I wore a hat, I'd take it off to her. Yeah.
Foreman would fight 4 more times in his heavyweight boxing career. He would be heavily criticized for his next fight against Axel Schultz. Firstly, for defending against an opponent outside the top 10. Secondly, for in many people's eyes, losing the fight, but at 46 years old, you can't be too critical. The final bout of Foreman's career would come in November 1997 against Shannon Briggs. The consensus opinion on this occasion would be that Foreman won the fight despite the judge's verdict. When Shannon Briggs himself loses to Lennox Lewis, the lineal heavyweight title finds its way to the man considered by most the fighter of the 90s. The final thing I'd like to address in this video is the question of whether or not the comeback version of Foreman was actually a nice guy. Foreman is not a guy without detractors.
George Foreman is not Santa Claus. He is not a guy you want to cross.
But George Foreman is the biggest... I'm going to say biggest phony ever.
It is possible that the dramatic and unlikely nature of Foreman's comeback is something that has become dramatized and transcended him as a person. I think it's safe to say that if you're one of the guys getting your head flushed down the toilet by Foreman in the Job Corps, this probably isn't the guy you would want to see successful, even if that success came decades later. However, if you look at the accusations about Foreman's return to the boxing ring being a fraud, these accusations prove to be entirely false. He was clearly there to be successful and not to take a dive and pick up a paycheck. It is possible he might have skeletons in his closet, but for the most part, I think he should be given the benefit of the doubt as a guy doing the best for him and his family.
The second time around, it was all about family.
As far as how the man is viewed in boxing history, Foreman himself is not overly concerned.
It's only history. It doesn't have to be that kind. So long as our family and friends are kind to us, we don't have to worry about anything else.
On that note, I will conclude my video and thank you for watching.